Hey everybody, this is the Revelland Podcast and my name is Stephanie Singer. I'll be your host today. This is the July edition of the podcast, which is a deep dive into the process of transforming gigs into accessible and immersive experiences. You can find an accessible version of this podcast with subtitles and video on our website and YouTube at Discover Revelland. If you're all comfortable, I'll do what I always do and introduce myself. So, I'm a white woman, I'm living in London, and I've got long blonde hair. Today, you'll find me inside my flat in South London, and I'm sitting in front of a green wall with a white fireplace. I'm wearing a black top, and I have a silver ring on the index finger of my right hand. Bit of context. Each month, I get the privilege of meeting and chatting with another band on this adventure of transforming their gigs into experiences. Today, it is Perhaps Contraption, and one of the fascinating things is about this journey, each band is totally unique, and part of the experience design is really encouraging a band to invite us into their world, which is something that Perhaps Contraption does very easily, considering there's 9 musicians, each of them a different brass player, so already their sound is very immersive. But what is it when they take this to the next level? So I'm delighted to have Perhaps Contraption in the space with me. It's not the full band, not the full community. We've only got 2 glorious members with us who will introduce themselves in a second. But obviously I've encountered you before at a live show, and I know that your live shows are huge and all-encompassing as well. So I'd love for you to introduce who you are and what you play, and a little bit about the whole vibe of Perhaps Contraption. So Christo, we'll start with you.
Hello, I'm Christo Squier. I am a white man. We're in a studio at the moment with a slightly fuzzy bad moustache, a blue top, pink braces, a yellow badge. That's about it, really. And I play, in Perhaps Contraption, I play flute and piccolo and a bit of tenor sax and guitar. And singing as well. And Mickey, yeah.
And me, I'm Mickey, and I play the trombone and sing and shout in the band. And today I'm wearing, well, it's a t-shirt that says First Taunton Wilton Scouts. Because I'm obviously a very proud scout. I've managed to keep hold of this for a while. I have got a white face and sort of a bedraggled, I'd say it's out of control stubble. It is a beard, but it's not very smart at the moment. There we go.
Fabulous.
What do you want to know?
A lovely hat as well.
Got a hat,
very
got
beard
a hat on and some headphones. And
very beard-focused introductions. I enjoyed that.
That's your beard.
I sadly don't have a beard myself, so I can't introduce that one.
You could put your hair around your face.
It's true. Maybe I'll do that for the whole podcast. No, I won't. That's for another time. So Perhaps Contraption. I've encountered you at festivals first. That was my first encounter with you. I think you were at Wilderness.
Yeah.
I think because we were there with BitterSuite, and I believe you encircled me and a couple of other people. Mm. So give our kind of audience a sense of, without this kind of level of Revelland, which is transforming your gigs into experiences which are accessible and immersive, which obviously is the mission statement of Revelland. Tell us, without Revelland, what is a Perhaps Contraption gig like already? Because it's quite an experience, no? Already.
I hope so. It's definitely an experience for us doing it, and we do seem to get elicit powerful responses from some audience members. Well, we're a 9-piece sort of contemporary brass band, which we write all our own music. We can perform in procession, so we've been parts of lots of parades or lots of site-specific performances. So we're very sort of flexible with where and when we perform and our movements. We love to move a lot, so there's lots of choreography. We wear brightly coloured costumes, so we have lots of plum and yellow in our costumes. So we've got a sort of exuberant costume theme. And the music sort of walks this tightrope between celebratory and uplifting, but it's also quite heavy and visceral in places. But I think we generally communicate quite a celebratory atmosphere. Like, it's very effusive, and we definitely give our all to the performance. So yeah.
There's something very joyous about you, and I think that part of the magic of Perhaps Contraption, certainly as I observe it, is that you are very much a community, because there's so many of you. It feels like already, kind of, when you attend or when you become part of a Perhaps Contraption gig, you kind of enter a community with you. You join the club. And that's really amazing, because, and I think, the level of noise that those instruments can make basically kind of hits the audience already. And I know that, in the past you have also taken quite a theatrical approach, I'd say, to the kind of curation of your experiences and your gigs in the past. You had one very notable theatrical kind of experience that you made. So this isn't your first rodeo, is it?
No.
It's not our first rodeo, no. But we did a month in Edinburgh doing our show called Nearly Human, which had movement and lights and a sit-down audience, which was new to us. I think we're quite used to, walking around and getting in people's faces reasonably politely, and so it was odd having a sit-down audience. I think that was the biggest difference, transferring to theatre.
That's really interesting, because it's like, I suppose that's not the aim of this new Revelland experience,
No.
is it? It's to actually, so you can kind of take that learning in, because a sit-down audience watching you is not the same thing as kind of becoming part of you as a band, which definitely feels more Perhaps Contraption. And so I don't actually know, I don't think I've ever asked you this, but how did you guys start? Like, what was the first thing? What brought you together as a band?
Well, it actually, the band was born, the concept was born in 2011, but Perhaps Contraption as a band name has been around since 2004. But for those that first period of time, it was a rock band, and it was still very experimental and unusual. But after exploring that for a long time, I got really bored with guitars. I mean, I'm a guitarist, but towards the end, I got really bored with using guitars and lugging amps around, and I started busking a lot or playing with bands in the street, and I was just really inspired by brass and woodwind instruments and having that mobility. And I've always really liked marching bands. So in 2011, actually, we've just turned 10. As of last weekend, it was this era of Perhaps Contraption's 10th birthday, because we did our first shows at Glastonbury Festival in 2011. So that's kind of nice. It's been 10 years of exploring this kind of mobile brass band version of Perhaps Contraption. I mean, I think it's finally arrived after those sort of first 6 years of doing other things. The brass band was really where it's meant to be. And Mickey had been playing with an earlier incarnation of Perhaps Contraption, where it was this it was kind of acoustic guitar and glockenspiel and drums in a pram, and it was this weird hybrid version of the old band and the new band. And I'd met Mickey. He used to play in a fantastic band called the Display Team, and I used to go to all their gigs, and I sort of poached Mickey from the Display Team, or said, "Do you want to do this weird band with me?" And thankfully, Mickey said yes.
Do you know why I said yes, though? I just read that book, Yes Man. Do you remember that? What's his name?
I love that context. That is so good.
I was just saying yes to everything, so...
Well, I'm glad you did. Oh, thanks.
Love it.
Because the band at that point was actually quite bad. Or quite definitely lacked bottom end because we just didn't have any bass. It's just a stupid lineup. So glad you said yes, Mickey. And then through a series of, once Mickey was on board and this transition was happening, it was through a series of arts jobs. Arts Council ran mailing list adverts, met some fantastic people through arts jobs. And then met our French horn player at the time on a train platform. She was carrying a French horn and she said, "Do you want to do the band? Here's my card." And various people who'd come to rehearsals already knew other people. So it kind of just branched out from a few initial adverts and chance meetings and poaching other people from bands. And then after a few years, it arrived.
You grew like an organism.
Yeah. And then it arrived. We were 6-piece, then 7-piece. We eventually arrived at 9-piece, and it was like, okay, this is enough now. When we were realizing what sort of colors and textures we needed to do what we wanted to do, so eventually we arrived at 9-piece about 4 or 5 years ago. I think that was when it kind of settled.
It's weird because there was two worlds colliding where everyone knows each other, because we knew each other from sort of the weird rock world, and then everyone who joined to that they were sort of more from the classical world, and they all knew each other, and then so there's a bit of this crossover, which I guess comes out in the sound of the band as well.
Yeah, exactly. You've got the kind of art school, kind of grungy, dirty rock scene mashing with the classically trained scene.
There's something that it makes me think that, and you said it, Christo, as well, that there is an experimental edge to you, for sure. I mean, it's like, and that's what's so cool about it, is it's like very joyous, very accessible music, but it's also it's densely composed at points and like pretty experimental. So that's exciting, I think. And you also mentioned a word like right at the beginning when you were describing the concept for the band. And so far as I've known your brains, I know that you are conceptually driven in some ways. Is that fair to say? You draw in influences from lots of different places that inspire the music or the way in which you make. It's not just sort of sound driven. It's kind of, you draw from lots of different places, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Mickey, you've probably got more to say about that.
I've got loads to say, but I'm unsure whether I should. I'm
just
really
let go.
Sure I'm gonna say. I guess we are. I mean, the whole idea of the band is a concept. It's like, I don't know if you could. It's a weird idea to come up with in the first place. That it's a brass band trying to play sort of pop music with classical instruments, and we definitely try and push the boundaries and stuff like that with the sound. As in, it's really hard to say, oh, we're a brass band, because I think people think of other, there are lots of really good brass bands, but they're playing like happy covers. I mean, the song Happy, and I don't have a problem with them, but that isn't us, and that isn't what we're trying to do. Who knows what we're trying to do, but we're making some noises.
Well, it's always felt very important that we wear costumes as well. I think that's obviously a big element, and we really sort of embody our performing alter egos. And we used to have our drums in a Victorian pram, so it's very like stylized and very that whole side of it allowed us to kind of let go more in performances. I would say, just get in the role a lot more. You get that separation between normal life and showtime, and the costume and concepts really help that.
And I think movement has always been a big part of what we do because we can, and I don't think many bands can. Orchestras are normally sat down, and rock bands are sort of tied by their leads, and they can do head nodding and head banging, it's called. But you're fairly limited. They're not doing pirouettes, where there are members of the band who do pirouettes.
I mean, that's the defining
You'd
element.
Get caught up in your guitar lead. You'd get all twizzled up.
It's just so nice to be able to play completely acoustically, and the sound works. And that was definitely a very early decision, was that the composition should work whether there's microphones there or not. And so we'd had to really build in choral moments and really think very carefully about the instrumentation and when it's used. But it's one of the best decisions we'd ever made, really, because we've played in the maddest places. I mean, we've played in the Dolomites, up mountains, we've played on beaches and forests, and we've just been all over the place. We were doing a gig in Spain once, and it was this street show at this brass festival, and it started chucking it down. And so we were just like, right, let's parade somewhere else. So we didn't stop the show. We paraded to cover, and we could carry on doing the show. And it was just such a wonderful moment to be able to be so flexible. And again, it gives that element that you felt when you saw us, Steph, where you feel a bit included. And definitely when we parade, it's like they're taking us somewhere. They're carrying us along. That sort of feeling of parade and celebration is really important and really fun to play with.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, there's undoubtedly like a togetherness kind of in the space with you. And so you already have thought quite deeply and quite practically about like how your gigs are invitations, I suppose. And it doesn't sound like it's been conscious. It sounds like it's just been kind of like you've been stylizing things and selecting things as you go and refining the band's identity, kind of in relation to gigs and in relation to the audiences that you observe experiencing your music. Versus some of the other bands, I think Revelland is kind of like, it feels very logical for you to be like, yes, this is obviously something that you're already kind of, this is the sphere that you're operating in, this is the brains that you kind of already have. But obviously there's like a few challenging extra levels with Revelland, not least the context of coronavirus. But we'll definitely get to that. But I guess, can you ground us in like as evocative a way as possible? What is your dream vision for what you would do for Revelland, or what you're going to do in September? And I understand there are challenges, but let's go for the big vision now, and we'll tuck into the meaty bit of the challenge in a minute.
Ooh,
You've got to do that one. You've got to nail this, Christo.
Don't feel like you want to nail it. No. Just bring it to life. What are the things, the concepts and the things you're designing, making?
Okay, so this is what we are actually doing, not what I would do without any restrictions.
Let's go for what you're actually doing.
Okay, good. Okay, that's fine. Well, what we hope.
Yeah, we hope we're doing.
Yeah, we hope we can be there, and that the COVID issue of us being able to travel is complex. We'll get to that, but the actual concept is we wanted to create an installation, a short and emotional and musical experience that has multi-sensory aspects, and we're channeling through the theme of memory, and through a big kinetic installation, which is a pendulum, a giant sound pendulum, which is a version of a thing called a harmonograph, which is essentially a pendulum, but it draws musical intervals in kind of like a spirograph. Very intricate geometric structures are drawn with harmonographs. And it's very simply a large pendulum, and this pendulum is being used to represent memory. And we are the audience members are invited to fill up the pendulum with sand, again, sort of significant of their experiences and their memory and their hopes. And as the pendulum is filled, this will be soundtracked by live music. Hopefully we'll be there surrounding the audience as this goes on. And we're also going to be working with a deaf performer who is going to describe some sort of emotional event that happens to them. We're still writing that actual event, and we're actually seeking a deaf writer as well to help develop the narrative for the show. But essentially, some emotional incident happens. The memory is sort of logged and set through this ritual of filling the sand pendulum with the sand that audience members have been given. And the sand is going to be scented, and it's probably going to be coloured. So there'll be this kind of nice multi-sensory aspect from the start. And then the pendulum is set in motion, and over the course of about 10 minutes, a beautiful pattern will be drawn, and the band and the performer will be surrounding the pendulum and playing music to match the movements of the pendulum and doing some choreography. And then once the memory has been set, the memory is set on in a pattern, then it will be destroyed. So it kind of feels there's this sense of preciousness and time passing and memories fading, and it's going to be swept away by our performer in hopefully some very lovely and visually exciting way. And then the emotional event, the story that you heard at the start will be repeated, but this time some elements are going to be changed. And the idea of that is to make the audience members question what they've seen at the start and how it differs from the end. Altering the story is going to be quite key as to how obvious we make that. So yeah, that's essentially what's going to happen. But it's a giant pendulum, and it's about memory.
It's such a evocative and detailed vision, I think, and it's also like, I mean, knowing where this all began, a year and a half ago now, about the world in which we lived in then is not the world we live in now. The concept of, at the beginning at least, we could hear so many hopes in the thing you were saying. We hope that that we'll be there live to do the music. There's so much, there's still so many ifs around the kind of whether or not the experience as is in your mind will take place in the way that you imagine it. But the experience that you're designing is so beautiful. I mean, it's like I can see it, I can feel like the ceremonial influences that are in it. Like I can imagine it being staged in lots of different spaces, in gallery spaces as well as gig spaces. Like it seems like a really versatile experience installation that you're kind of making. And so, and obviously memory at this time, like, is there any kind of relationship between the context of this coronavirus climate that we're in and the topics that you're exploring? Do you think they've been encouraged by this climate, or are they separate? How did you arrive at memory, I guess?
I think it's impossible not to have been influenced by coronavirus / COVID-19, because it's just, it's everywhere. And I think of even trying to remember what life was like before it feels a bit weird thinking I would open a door and not worry about the handle, or I would go on a train and not worry about pressing the button and all that stuff. So I think memory is really important to us at the moment, and because we also have the memory of what we're trying to get back to, hopefully, after all this is done. And I guess in the same way that the piece is trying to show that memory is also sometimes a bit false or a bit fake, and possibly a bit more optimistic. Maybe some of the things we look back on weren't quite as good as we are remembering them. Like going to the pub was pretty nice, but they all say they're a bit busy. Sometimes you don't want to have to queue for the bar, and now you don't. So
you don't have to queue for your own fridge,
no.
do you?
So yeah, why don't we just do one about pubs? Do the show about pubs.
And so let's, from your perspectives, like, we're in July and the gigs are happening in September, which always, I think July and September sound so far away in atmosphere, because July is July, it's the summer, you know? And September is the beginning of the next year, sort of, somehow, because I'm still so embedded in school brain. But obviously it's not really that long away, and you're still saying hopes. And I think that so many kind of musicians and artists, and literally any human being, will be able to sympathize or empathize with you on that, because that's a lot of uncertainty 2 months ahead of a live show. What are you feeling? If you don't mind sharing, what are you actually feeling about that?
It's definitely very stressful, but we just have to approach it logically and find solutions. If we can't be there, you know, we'll have to pre-record the music and have to direct from afar and help make sure that the vision that we have is accurately represented, and the people that experience it have a powerful experience. So there's definitely sort of safety nets that we can put in place, but it's really tested certainly my skills as a producer to plan all eventualities, and just cover multiple outcomes. Is you just have to have your brain in two places at once. But it's definitely stressful. Just hoping, a lot of hope that we'll be able to do what we set out to do.
It's interesting as well, because I suppose I think about after this experience is done and it's happened, and then you've got an installation and a map and a production schedule, and whether you were there or not, in your brain you have designed something that could theoretically happen worldwide, because you will have developed the skills, and you might not even need to be there. There's something that I can see. The stress is huge, but the possibilities after that actually are quite massive. Internationally, for like as a separate way of like touring. But does that excite you as a potential growth point for the music industry in that way? So it's like you might not even attend all of these exhibitions that possess sort of the qualities of the Perhaps Contraption feeling, but like Perhaps Contraption are not there. Is that of interest to you as musicians, or does that feel like a loss?
It definitely interests me. I sort of like it. Mickey doesn't like it. I mean, it's just because I've never done anything like that before, so it's learning new things. So that side of it's exciting. I mean, I'd rather be performing, but it's a new thing. But do you hate it?
I mean, that's the thing. Well, no, I'd just rather be performing. That's the thing. I'd rather go travel internationally. I get that that's not possible, and might not be possible for years and years and years and years, but who knows?
Yeah, but the prospect of, in a way, it feels very professional to have designed an experience and just be like, this is how you set it up, here's the instructions. The artist won't be there. It feels like pro fine art.
Very Akram card.
Yeah, right. Like fine art gallery kind of level of doing things that we would never have even considered doing before this. It would, if there's a possibility of kind of having the performance travel to different places, and it be able to run with gallery staff or venue staff are able to set it and make it run, and we just use projections and recordings and the pendulum, then that's definitely a really exciting prospect, and unusual outcome, unexpected outcome, but I think is a really really creative way of dealing with these limitations that we have at the moment.
I guess most art, the artist isn't present during the viewing.
That's why music's the best.
It's the privilege. I know, it's true, because the artist is present. But in this, it's interesting, isn't it, actually, to kind of observe whether that... I mean, I guess we already see that is the shift, don't we? I mean, if you're listening to an album, I suppose, then the artist is not present, but sometimes the recording gives you the impression, the way that the person is mic'd or the environment, that's why lots of albums, when they have those moments in between the sessions where you hear all the musicians being like having a chat in the background or whatever, you feel like they are present, but
I hate live albums.
Yeah, it is rarer.
Yeah, I can't get into them.
You want everything live.
No,
right?
I mean, I like an album, but I like listening to music, but a live album always feels, it never sounds right, and it doesn't feel, even a live album of something I'd seen probably wouldn't feel right, because you get all the vibrations and the atmosphere when you're actually there, which that's the thing that makes it a step up, and I guess that's what we're trying to recreate in some ways.
That's interesting, actually, because when I think about experience design generally, like the thing that really excites me is kind of increasing the liveness for people, as like the reason to stimulate the senses, the reason to think sensorially is because it holds people's attention just that little bit further. If you do it right, it keeps people present, keeps people here with you, and so it's so easy in gigs and in daily life at the moment to slightly disengage, it's interesting. It's interesting kind of pushing that point further, what you're saying, Mickey, kind of pushing liveness. And in the case of Revelland generally, their mission statement is immersive and accessible, or immersive and inclusive. And I just wanted to kind of explore that in the ways in which both the process as well as the outcome and your relationship to accessibility and inclusivity. Like I've said before on this podcast and the other ones, that I don't identify as disabled. I'm not disabled. And there's been quite a strong feeling that this process has not involved necessarily deaf voices at the centre, partly because there's been issues with connecting groups via the technologies we've been using. But I just wanted to get your thoughts on how you as a band, I know you've done work to involve deaf voices already, but what do you have to say on the matter of accessibility and in relation to this piece?
Well, I think when you said, they're aiming for immersiveness and inclusivity, I think the immersiveness is something that we're probably strong on, but inclusivity is not something we've really had to do before. We've done a few things here and there, but I think we definitely haven't spoken to enough people who would say they were disabled or deaf people, and I think that's one of the things, because I was thinking about the narrative, and I just suddenly felt awful writing it and thinking, I'm going to write the story for us to perform to a deaf audience potentially, and that's not another, they've probably heard enough of my voice, or in the grand scheme of things, could I not hopefully find somebody who could write from that viewpoint?
Which is what prompted your decision to sort of discover a deaf writer. Which
I've connected with a deaf writer, but I don't know if they're going to be the final one. But I contacted a few, and it's actually quite hard. I haven't managed that many, so we shall see. And
what other kind of creative decisions do you feel like you're making at the moment that embed accessibility inside of this gig, and how has that process actually felt for you to discover those solutions? Or I sort of hate the word solutions, it sounds very reductionist, but what have you discovered, I guess, in this process?
It just sort of makes you increase the sort of the breadth of the design, and you really have to, I mean, it should be something instinctive done by all artists and all venues, etc. It is, and I hope it's changing. It seems like it's changing, but then again, as I don't identify as disabled either, I'm not tuned into these issues as well. Someone who is disabled, but it really makes you consider all senses. It makes you want to make sure that the narrative is very clear. So we're having everything signed, but it's also going to be the narrative's going to be recorded, so it will be signed and you'll be able to hear it, and it will be, hopefully it's going to be videoed as well, so it will be blown up really big, so it won't just be one performer signing. It will be it will be sort of bright and bold in the space as well. Yeah, all of those things are obviously really important because it increases the level of enjoyment and inclusivity for everyone, and hopefully it increases it for everyone. It's not like those perks are just for disabled people. Like those production elements should feed into everyone, which makes the performance as a whole much stronger and much more powerful. And I really think it will. So we've never had to think in this all-encompassing way before, and it's been a really, really worthwhile process, and we're really glad to be connecting with people from the community and actually performing with them. Like, that's a really important part for us, is that we don't feel like we've actually connected with people from these communities. So if we can connect in a very deep creative sense, like being in the rehearsal room with them and performing with them and collaborating with them, then I think that's one of the best things we can do, because it's just means more people are involved and more people are represented.
It makes me think that if this process was to be repeated, actually that would be a much more profound way of kicking this process off, would be to literally bring communities together to create something like a devising process that's held, where there is members of the creative members of the deaf community brought together with a band, and then together in a process that's ideally in person, but if not, it's held digitally somehow. That is how the decisions are made, because it makes me think of that sentence, which is so it's all around the UK, I think, nothing about us without us, and I think that kind of says it all.
It's so interesting when you bring two worlds together. It's like I spent a while on deaf YouTube just looking at videos, and it's so cool. There's so many good things that I would never have. That's a world that I just haven't looked at, and it's so interesting. And you suddenly see sort of a whole foray of like media that people are taking in that I would never look at, and I think that's what it's about, of like sharing with different communities, because that could be true of any community. Is suddenly I'm really interested in football, so I'll look at all those things, and it's just about sharing communities. And wow, I never thought I'd say those words. It's all about bringing communities together.
It is. I agree with you. And it's making me think as well, one of the big things is this process has been incredible in lots of ways, because we've had to adapt so many times, but it has been a struggle at points, and I know that there have been some real challenges for you. Not only are we trying to do something not in the country that we all live in, you're trying to do something with 9 other individuals who don't live near you, and also you can't see, and you can't practice with, to create the score of the music that you're going to use in the gig that's coming up in a place which you don't even know if you can be at. Right? with instruments that are commonly thought of as being the ones that would pass COVID-19 the most, right? Even though we know that's been disproved, but disproved,
Thanks,
denied. Science. So, how have you been approaching this creatively, like holding your group together? And if you want to share some of the challenges, feel free. But I am really interested in what kind of, how have you been producing this? How have you been directing this? What has worked for you as creatives to kind of keep yourselves going?
Well, we've had to. We've got a smaller team within the band. There's a kind of a core team of 3 who are working on this particular show. Just because it gets harder with other people's schedules and other people's other projects to have all 9 voices involved. We gave everyone in the group the opportunity to be involved, but some people opted out. So everyone who opted in to produce the show opted in. So we've got a core
very
team.
Narrow-minded. They weren't interested in the project. Narrow-minded people in the band.
Yeah, some people bit mean, bit nasty.
Yeah, they're mean people.
No, they're not really. They're lovely. But it's so yeah. There's a core team of 3 who have been bashing out the main creative elements. The main thing that we're waiting to do in terms of composing, people have been sketching and composing on their own. We are going to get in the room together this Sunday, providing, well, actually, we don't have a drummer because he's got COVID, which is not funny. Our drummer has COVID.
It's funny because the one thing that we've been trying to do is we also rehearsed last week, and now we're all having to test and things because Ricky did test positive after that, so then suddenly rehearsing becomes a bit risky again, and it's a freaking nightmare.
Yeah, but we hopefully will be in the room on Sunday. But the main musical development is just going to come when we've got 2 days in production with the pendulum in August. So just being in the space with this contraption, with these contraptions, we'll have 2 days to play with it, and just when we get together, we can normally come up with things like fairly quickly. We've got this sort of lovely joint musical mind. We're used to co-composing in the room. So in that sense, as long as we can do that session, that feels very comfortable, because I know there'll be interesting things that will come from it. We've got a nice big space, we can rig it, we can repeat it, and just develop the music. So that's where the majority of the music will be built. And then aside from that, Mickey and me and Jin are there kind of casting it, looking for people, developing the narrative. So yeah, we're confident, but yeah, time's tight. The sands are trickling away. You like that link back to the yeah?
I loved it.
Thanks.
Yeah, I loved it. I actually, I most appreciated the contraption link. That was very real for me. That was very, very deep when you said that. I was like, wow, it is the contraption of the Perhaps Contraption. That's very exciting. And it definitely is coming through this whole thing that, it sounds like this piece, that the Revelland gigs is the beginning of something, of a piece that will go beyond the Revelland experience. I would assume. Is that safe to say? This is not going to it won't be something that you do for Revelland and then you go, and that's that piece over. This is something that is the kind of beginning of a new installation for you.
Yeah, we hope so, and that was part of the brief from the very start of Revelland, is to be able to devise a performance that can be duplicated and won't be too costly, so we can go on and travel to other places and the way we're designing it might be that we could take the piece with the full cast of musicians and performers, or maybe there's a version of the piece that can travel quite easily, just with instructions to set up. So that's really nice that the piece it should be scalable, and we hope that it will have a long life, a legacy going. Legacy. I'm going to do my politicians. Legacy. Going forward.
That's great. I mean, it's really fantastic. And if you were to imagine another band kind of next year getting involved in this process, and presumably we won't have another COVID-19 during or pandemic during their experience, who knows? But if we keep it focused and sort of not including COVID-19, what advice would you give to those bands?
I think be flexible. I think it's really helped us not having a really solid vision at the beginning, which sounds wrong. Like it feels like you should start with a solid vision and then work towards it, but it's been really helpful not having that solid vision, because the circumstances have been ever changing. So I think it would have been quite sad if we'd really bought into this idea of this one show and then it's gone. But as a result, we have created something that fits the circumstances, which maybe is of its time and is a reflection of where we are. So that would be my advice. That's not advice, is it?
Oh, it's good. Yeah, it's good advice.
Flexible.
Keep smiling.
That's definitely advice.
Keep smiling, guys. That's my
yeah.
advice.
Be nimble. I'd say nimble, not flexible, but that's...
nimble. Yeah.
Yeah, and just use
I like that.
use the technology around you. There's plenty of ways to collaborate, even though you're separate. I got one of these things called a phone the other day, so at any time I can just. Mickey's got his own numbers. I just call him up and we connect. So use the technology around you, people. But no, sorry, I'm messing. Even things like using Logic or different doors that you can co-compose in so many different ways now. So just use those tools as well as being very flexible.
Well, I am super excited to see or experience the pendulum, and the next time we speak to you, it will be during the gigs somehow. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences, and if you've nothing else to say, then we can wave goodbye.
I just tried to call you Christo, but it doesn't work. You had it on airplane mode.
Call you later. I'm busy now.
Why is no one calling me?
Have you got one? Have you got one?
Meant nothing.
A phone?
Yeah.
I think my neighbour's got one, yeah.
Oh, great. They're going to be big. But thanks for having us. And
thanks for having us.
Thanks for being here.
We'll hopefully see you in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
Yes. Fingers crossed. Bye. And that's all we have time for today. Thanks for joining the July episode of the Revelland Podcast. Stay in touch with us at Discover Revelland.